With the presence of mana and psychic energy in large quantities, the first rain showers began to appear on Mars. The Martians who lived underground to avoid the desolate surface began to surface to see these never-before-seen Martian rainstorms. The weather change was just one of the many changes happening to the planet because of Justinian. The life forms present on Mars began to mutate at the exposure of Simona. From simple bacteria, plants, and animals to the white Martians themselves. The livestock and crops that the white Martians used at the exposure to both energies mutated into powerful beasts that were no longer controllable to most. In smaller, weaker city-states, these livestock broke free and used their newfound abilities to fight back. They went from mostly docile to magic beasts that could kill white Martians. These creatures developed psychic and magical abilities of their own, which was hard to control for weak city-states. The kingdoms and empires for the most part succeed in controlling the new beast tide that was forming at a cost. Their livestock was gone because the newly evolved beasts were nearly uncontrollable. Tens of thousands died in the first few days, and that was just counting those killed by the beast tides. Some white Martians just could not tolerate the higher concentrations of mana, which resulted in uncontrollable mana outbursts resulting in deaths. Martian resilience made it rare, but not all were built the same. Another real danger was geothermal activity and earthquakes, which started to cause long-dormant volcanoes to begin building up energy. These were just a few of the disasters that the white Martians had to face outside of Cadia City. With Symages existing already and exposure to mana beforehand, none of his citizens experienced mana outbursts. Rather, more of his citizens were helped to develop magical abilities. As for the beast tide that the other populations faced, Justinian space marines, science, and shapers managed to bring the evolved beasts under control. Justinian could see use in these creatures, and he ordered them tamed. His shapers began to work on this project, as they could be used as shock troops. Once genetically and magically modified, they would be real terrors. Image here. They could even be used as familiars for Symages among the shapers. A good investment for their breeding and taming, so their status as livestock was switched. Losing the natural Martian livestock was a loss, but they made up for it by replacing them with some of the Terran crops and livestock they had been raising. For one, the crops that grew larger, healthier, and far more prolific with mana. Some did become man-eating, but they were the minority. With the changes, they could be grown far faster than before, resulting in better food yield. He also ordered his farmers to start growing earth crops like wheat, corn, potatoes, carrots, cucumbers, apples, pears, peaches, blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries. Mostly crops that Justinian himself liked to eat, but plants were not the only thing being produced. Cows, chickens, goats, pigs, and wild boar, which were purchased and kept in bounded field for their safety after being allowed to acclimate, were started to be bred. These were meat animals other than the cows and chickens, which were being raised for their eggs and milk. Once they were modified to live on the Martian surface, the livestock and plants all began to mutate under the Simona on the planet. This made them larger, stronger, and hardier for livestock to be raised. This was mostly an experiment to see if it would work, and in the month that the experiment was undergone, it was a success. Near the fortress that Justinian had constructed, farms stretched for miles on the surface. Rain was still sparse, but small clouds began to form in the sky. The sun was less intense than before, and with human fertilizers, farms began to be expanded on the Martian surface. As for Justinian himself, he had kept himself busy in his laboratory working on his genetic experimentation. Using his vast intellect and his magical know-how, he started to use science and magic to work on cloning technology. He still planned to create a clone army, much like the clones from Star Wars. However, the main template would still be Slade Wilson. He could also produce clones of Kryptonians, Tamaranians, Daxamites, and other powerful alien species in the future. With the use of his reality-manipulating abilities, Justinian upgraded his laboratory and set up a separate dimension where he was conducting his experiments. His main current material was the many corpses of the green Martians that were buried all over Mars by the white Martians in mass graves. After so long, all that was left was mostly bones and in some cases mummified corpses. Justinian could reverse this decomposition, which allowed him to experiment on the green Martian DNA. He took some DNA from one of the chapter masters of his chapters of Space Marines, which was of the warrior caste. He spliced the two together, leading to him creating effectively a green Martian warrior caste. They were not burning Martians, but they were closer to his honor guard than others. In his lab, only they could enter the dimension where he did his genetic experiments. Currently, 30 days after he used his godlike abilities to grow Mars, he was standing in front of a floating specimen. Remnosh was looking at the test tube, where a large green Martian floated. Its features were closer to white Martians while having the green skin of the green Martians. Remnosh turned to him. "What do you think, love?" Justinian turned to her with his helmet currently off. "I think that this experiment was a success." As he said that, a portal opened to his dimension where Sigismund entered. With a wave of his hand, a pile of skeletons and mummies was dropped on the ground. "Here you are, my lord. More green corpses." Justinian nodded as the AI in his lab dragged away the bodies for processing. "Thank you." With a bow, Sigismund left Justinian and Remnosh alone. He walked away from the tank as he looked at some of his creations. Floating in the alchemical fluid was a giant T-Rex covered in biological armor. It had 3 pairs of eyes, a carapace, and what appeared to be fire burning on its body. Remnosh crossed her arms as she looked at that creature. "What is that?" "A dinosaur, chickens, and birds are descended from them. I effectively turned back the evolutionary clock on their genes with some science and magic. By increasing the concentration of those genes, I produced this specimen from mostly chickens. A few more genetic modifications, and I should be able to create more of such creatures." Remnosh nodded as she looked up at the giant creature. Justinian had spliced some of her DNA into it. At the moment, it was in stasis along with some other monsters. And the one next to it? Justinian looked at the next specimen, a mix of an eagle and a wolf. "I called it a Luquilla. I spliced wolf and eagle DNA." The large creature was effectively a griffin, but rather than an eagle and lion, it was a wolf. The creature had a wolf body, an eagle head, 3 sets of wings, and a pair of back eagle talons. Justinian planned to release these creatures into the Martian ecosystem to begin to seed them with mystical animals. He also had a regular griffin, but for the most part, these were works in progress. Justinian walked over to a false dragon in the alchemical fluid. He made this one by gathering his draconic genes and mixing them with the DNA of crocodiles, alligators, lizards, and some snakes. It was the only one as he was just experimenting, but one just had to look across the room to see the monsters he was cooking up. Remnosh liked to ask him what he was making, and he always explained. Just as he was walking around, he froze in place as he felt 2 familiar consciousnesses awaken. Draig and Albion had awoken from their 1-month hibernation. "It is about damn time." Justinian raised his left arm to gaze at the boosted gear. The purple gold gem fired up as pure divine energy roared through his body. "Lay off. We worked just as hard as you to make sure you didn't pop." "He is right, Justinian. Imagine if you didn't have us." Justinian smirked as he was glad to have his friends back with him. "I know. Glad to have you boys back." Justinian could just feel their mighty souls linked back up with his own, causing an endless circuit with his soul as the core. His aura started to rise as with their ascensions completed, he was now hosting the souls of 2 dragon gods. If not for his perpetual status, his body would fall apart at containing even just one of these dragons, let alone 2 and their concepts that now truly made him a menace. He began to feel the inheritance of the Emperor begin to grow even stronger as his psychic and magical abilities were expanded. Remnosh, who was in his lab, grit her teeth as she feels more energy flow through their bond. Again, this time, it was far less severe than before thanks to her being a burning Martian, but it was not pleasant. In only a few moments, Justinian settled himself down as he, Draig, and Albion processed the power upgrades. "You know, I always wondered what Great Red felt like. Guess this is it. He had a body, we don't." Justinian smiled. "Make avatars, give it a try." Drake and Albion both separated their consciousness from their souls, which would not leave the boosted gear or divine dividing. Two small orbs left the two sacred gears before a surge of conceptual energy gathered together. In front of him, two draconic-looking men appeared. Drake, for one, was massive, 7 feet 5 inches, with dark red hair, a manly beard, slit-like eyes, and bodybuilder-like muscles. A large set of draconic horns and a swaying tail. Albion was more regal. He was 6 feet 2 inches. He had long flowing silver hair and a pair of prideful blue eyes. He wore a regal robe, and despite having a regal face, his body was anything but regal. He had large draconic muscles and a broad chest. Drake took a deep breath as he began to stretch. Why didn't I think of that? Even if they destroy these avatars, our souls and minds will just return to our sacred gears. Albion clenched his fist as he glanced up at Justinian. This could come in handy in a fight. Justinian sat down with a smirk. I can see it now, a good old jumping. Oh, by the way, Rimnosh, meet my friends. That big guy is Drake, the dragon god of domination, and this is Albion, the dragon god of supremacy. Drake and Albion greeted her politely. However, Drake walked over and wrapped her up in a tight hug. Kind of funny because she was 3 feet taller than he was. Nice to meet you. Glad of you to take care of our bro, Justinian. Rimnosh frowned as Drake let go of her. Is he always that touchy? Justinian shook his head. No, imagine losing your body for centuries. A good hug is probably what he needs. Drake smiled as he grabbed Albion in a headlock. True in women. Where are the human princesses? Albion frowned as he looked at Justinian. Drake is where the legend of dragons wanting human princesses originated. He had a thing for them. He elbowed Drake in the chest, making his rival and now friend let go of him. Once he was released, Albion fixed his robes before turning to Justinian. All right. While we were sleeping, we could feel someone trying to communicate with us. Their attempts failed as we both blocked the communication. Justinian frowned, as this could be troublesome. I may know what that was. Good of you to block it. Just as Justinian was going to explain, Sigismund rushed back into the secret cloning lab in the secret dimension. My lord, I bring news. Justinian frowned as he looked at his guard. What is it? A ship coming from the deep solar system has been reported to be descending near our fortress. All of our weapon batteries are primed to shoot it out of the sky, but they have sent communication attempts. Justinian hummed as he had an idea who these were. Either the Jovians, which are from planet Jupiter, or Saturnians, red Martians who come from clones. At least that is what the old comic wiki said. I will go see them, Sigismund, bring all my honor guard, and my Predacons. With a bow, Sigismund returned to gather his fellow burning Martians. As for Justinian, he was curious about what these aliens wanted. If they wanted war, he was all for it, because he and his honor guard were enough. Rimnosh, let us see what they want. They should know better than to enter my planet without permission. She smirked as she placed her helmet on. Let's. Justinian teleported them all to his surface fortress, where, just as Sigismund said, all of the weapon batteries were locked on a small ship. It was not moving because it was not permitted to land, but soon after Sigismund teleported in a burst of flame with the rest of the Justinian honor guard. This included his 5 pet Predacons, who looked even more dangerous than before. They were massive creatures of living flesh, and they all locked on the craft. Justinian squinted his eyes as he initiated communicating with the visitors. You may land. Chapter 31, A God Among Men. When Justinian gazed at the alien vessel, his mind ran through several possibilities. Most of the aliens he knew inhabited Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were quite old. He had not heard of those aliens in the modern-day comics, so he was going off the fact they did not exist. It appears that he had been quite wrong, which caused him a great deal of annoyance. As he crossed his arms, behind him, Predaking, Grindel, Devastator, Grimlock, and Ravage all began to snarl and hiss. With the smile of a pet owner, he began to run his hand down the living metal faces of his 5 pets. Easy, my pets. I will decide if they will feed your hunger for flesh. With hisses and growls, his predicants backed off, which made Albion and Draig to gaze at the mechanical dragons. They began to communicate through their souls. While their avatars were physical, their souls still resided in the sacred gears that were part of Justinian's power armor. You know, these predicants, as you call them, can more than match us at our previous peaks before we were sealed. Isn't that a bitch that just being contracted to you? They have become this powerful. Albion shook his head at that. They may match us in raw power, but they lack our techniques. You could use your boost to exceed them, just like my divide could do the same. We should teach them our ways so they can create unique skills. Not a bad idea. They can access my power, and with them being my familiars. They can also shape-shift their bodies to form any weapon that I know, and I know plenty. Regardless, let's show our power to these aliens. Inside the small vessel, the 3 alien diplomats were currently in a telepathic discussion. The leader of the 3, a female, had her features hidden in a long green robe. It appears that the one responsible for the changes that happened to Mars has come to meet us. The ability to change the sizes and locations of the stellar bodies is a dangerous power. He could end our entire civilization with a wave of his hand. We must guarantee peace between our civilizations for our good. The third didn't disagree. Agreed. Let us hope our gifts are enough to get a discussion going. As their vessel began to descend toward the landing bay of the fortress, they continued to discuss what they would say. Currently, their ship was showing Justinian his honor guard and his 5 predicants. They could feel pressure coming from every being that had come to meet them. However, they focused on Justinian in particular, and in a smaller part Draig and Albion. Just as they were mid-discussion, the 3 diplomats instantly fell to their knees at the sheer telepathic force that slammed into their minds. Blood began to leak from the woman's nose as she heard Justinian's voice. Lan. When the link was cut, she gasped for breath. Her thoughts thought back to the fools who had thought they could do anything to that thing. She didn't consider Justinian a person anymore, just a force of nature. We must not offend him. Her fellow diplomats agreed. Agreed, Lady Nemen. We must ensure he does not turn his attention to our people. It was too late, as Justinian fully intended to conquer the entire solar system. Once all of Mars was compliant and his war machine was operational, if they did not comply, they would face extinction. It was already fated that he would conquer the entire galaxy, and nothing would stop him from his ambition. When their vessel landed, the diplomats picked themselves up and wiped their noses to appear at least somewhat presentable. It did not take long as the doors to the ship opened. The first thing they saw was 5 titanic creatures leaning close and roaring at them. Predaking, Grimlock, Ravage, Devastator, and Grendel all backed off with a wave of Justinian's hand. They flew off, but they still circled high in the sky. Their mechanical optics locked onto their souls to not let them escape if they tried. When the 3 ambassadors left their shuttle, it was obvious they were much smaller than any of Justinian's guards. They were not very tall, as they were around 6 feet, which made them very small to Justinian and his burying Martian elite guards. He looked down to meet the gazes of these red-skinned aliens. None spoke as Justinian spoke up. I believe I know who you all are. Saturnians, from the moons of Saturn. The female nodded before speaking in Saturnian. Normally, she would communicate telepathically, but after feeling the pressure that came from connecting to his mind, she did not dare. Yes, we are. We come in a hope to bridge peace between our people. Justinian didn't understand it, so he dived into her mind and learned the language from her. Once again, that terrible psychic pressure fell on her mind, causing her to nearly fall to her knees once more. This was a combination of Justinian's soul, which had been enhanced by his god-emperor inheritance, and containing 2 dragon gods. Only the most powerful of psychics and mages would be able to get into his mind without issue. He also analyzed her entire life from the moment of her birth before nodding to himself. I was correct. Your entire civilization is the descendants of clones of low-class Martian explorers. I guess this is why you're all so weak. Rather than focus on battle, you focus on technology. Yet, your technology is not all that great either. You're still stuck in the solar system, limited by the distance. Since you are here to fight for peace, I shall hear you out. What do you have to offer me? The woman nodded as the one chosen by the king of their people. We have good reason for not leaving the solar system. The other planets around us are inhabited and we don't get along. It was hard enough to send this vessel past the Jovians of Jupiter. Hearing that, he looked up, gazing at the gas giants of the solar system. They were of vital importance to him. Jupiter was the site of the largest shipyard and Mechanicus forge world. It was where most void ships were constructed and more. The rest of the gas giants served as human colonies where the moons and other man-made space colonies hosted untold billions. He had the same idea, and while he was not xenophobic, if the Xenos that inhabited those planets refused him, they would face the same fate as the Great Crusade Xenos. Justinian had been silent for only a few moments, but it was still quite unnerving. "Are all of you at war?" The Saturnian woman shook her head. "Not exactly. We have small skirmishes from time to time, but there has not been a great war in many decades. We are mostly peaceful, but from time to time we are forced to fight." Justinian connected his mind to his honor guard as he began to discuss with them. "The situation is not ideal. I have plans that will need the entire solar system compliant to my Imperium. If only Mars was fully compliant and my flagship was complete. How goes the construction of the Invincible Reason?" Dorn gave him an update on the construction of the Gloriana-class flagship. "Thanks to all the advancements and the increased resources, the ship is nearing 50% complete. However, it is not yet ready for any kind of engagement." Justinian didn't mind, as while he could use his powers to speed up the construction, it would lower the quality. "I see. Speak free. As my honor guard, your voices matter." Sigismund brought up a dark idea. "My lord, I recommend a deception. You use the Saturnians for all they are worth, and when Mars is under your boot, you turn your armies against them when they least expect it." This called to him, but Rimnosh brought up a counter to this. "Wouldn't we betraying an ally like this bring your honor into question?" Tigurius countered this point instantly. He had been made to take the form of Tigurius of the Ultramarines. "I do not agree. We can take the time to silence any such words. We all know how powerful individually we are now, much less our master. We should use them and their civilization to speed up the process of conquering the planet. I say we stop using a scalpel and we use a hammer. Us 40, and our master, we use all our power to force the empires and kingdoms to bend the knee. Then we can take the time to make sure all of Mars is compliant, even if it takes us time." Justinian paused when he heard this. "Now that sounds like an idea, Tigurius. You 40 are my most powerful troops. As burning Martians, nearly nothing can kill you. This is what we shall do. As soon as these Saturnians leave with our promise of peace, we take off the gloves. We speed up the unification of Mars. I will take over the entire psychic net of the planet, and I will take control of the beast tide. I will also speed up my cloning. I will send a few squads of Marines down to Earth to capture a few targets." Any opposition? None of his honor guards said anything against his plan, so Justinian cut the link. While their conversation went on for a few minutes, only a few seconds of silence had gone by. Justinian turned back to the Saturnian diplomate woman. "I, Emperor Justinian of Mars, have made a decision. I will hear out your terms to peace, but I will only do so by meeting your king on neutral ground. I am sure you would not want to meet here on my planet, and I will not go to your capital. We will meet halfway in the asteroid belt. The Jovians will not dare cause trouble for me, because if they do, I will unleash my wrath upon them. Does this work?" The woman was not pleased because she did not want her ruler anywhere near Justinian. However, with the kind of power he had, it did not matter if they were feet apart of thousands of miles apart. It was all the same with the kind of power he could wield. "Yes, I am sure our king would want to converse in person with you, Emperor Justinian. When shall we schedule this meeting?" 6 weeks Terran time. You know how time is kept on that planet?" The woman nodded. "Yes, we keep an eye on all planets of the solar system, Earth as it is called. I call it Terra, but we have an agreement." "Yes. In 6 weeks, we will send our fleet to the asteroid belt. Before we leave, we will leave our gifts." With a wave of her hand, the two Saturnians walked into their ship before bringing out a chest. They placed it down at his feet before they opened it. Inside was what Justinian could only call a sword made of pure diamond. It was a large blade that, to Justinian's unique sight, was flowing with psychic energy. As you know, the pressure of our planet is so great that it rains liquid diamond. Our smiths can collect this rain, and we use it to create our weapons. After being treated by our smiths, we can create weapons like this. Justinian waved his hand and drew the blade into his hand. He pulled the sword out of the sheath to observe it. He surged psychic and conceptual energy, the divine energy of dragon gods, into the blade, causing it to glow with an icy purple gold. He flicked the blade and was pleasantly surprised at the hardness. Not bad. I take that your greatest weapons are made from this material? The Saturnian woman nodded. Yes, only our nobles and royalty receive these arms. We also give them out as gifts of peace. Justinian placed the sword in the sheath it came from before. I will accept this gift. I will meet with your king in good faith. That was a lie, but lying was just another weapon rulers kept. He watched as the Saturnians got back into their ship, allowed to leave by his predicants. When they were gone, his smile faded. Prepare for total conquest of Mars. You 40 will all split up and either slay or bring kings and emperors to their knees. Gather my chapter masters, as I have missions for them on Earth. The same goes for Earth. Find me some infiltrators, because I'm taking our Earth countries. Drake smiled as he looked up at his friend. How about me and Albion? We can help? I know. Tell me, using your concepts, think you can make me some real dragons? Drake and Albion looked at each other as they thought of this. Albion nodded. Yes, if we work in unison with you. Using our 3 abilities, we should be able to create more than just dragons. You taking over the beast tide and merging the psychic net will work. Justinian liked the sound of that. He began to walk into the fortress to reach the elevator, his honor guard walking behind him. As for his predicants, they choose to stay on the surface, but as discussions continued, it was clear the next 6 weeks would be bloody. This planet and galaxy was only big enough for one empire, and that would be his Imperium. The Imperium of the Emperor failed, but Justinian's would not. Chapter 32, The Imperium. Justinian felt that 6 weeks were not going to be enough to use his magical abilities, so he created a massive bounded field in unison with Drake and Albion. The 3 of them covered Mars, Phobos, and Deimos in a time dilation field to give themselves far more time. The planet and its 2 moons in this time dilation field continued their orbit around the sun without issue, and none were the wiser. From Earth, it merely seemed that Justinian had placed a magical protection field around Mars, but it was so much more. The Justice League was starting to believe Batman that Justinian was not a benevolent person. Diana was starting to have a harder and harder time justifying his actions, but with the discovery of her twin brother, she wouldn't and couldn't betray him. She still vouched for him, but thus far, Justinian was far more occupied with Mars. His dilation field trapped every single living being on Mars, and it did as it was named. It dilated time, giving Justinian not 6 weeks to finish his work, but 6 years. Drake, Albion, and Justinian made the decision that they needed more time, and they were not going to wait for it naturally. Once the field was up, Justinian cut loose on the brutality he had been suppressing. He released his honor guard and Martians who had been itching for carnage. 20 of his honor guard, including Remnosh, led his 20 chapters of 20,000 soldier white Martians. In these campaigns, the different chapters of Marines began forced recruitment of young soldier caste white Martians. Once they were forced to sign the proper magic binding contracts, they were subjected to genetic, magical, and psychic enhancements to make them proper Space Marines. Much like the real Space Marines, loyalty was ingrained in them not just from their souls, but their very DNA and minds made them loyal to Justinian. Not only were the Space Marines going through a rise in numbers, but even the laborers were going through the same. The Tempesticians were mass recruiting from Mars, having similar practices to the Space Marines. Mars had a population of 450 million before Justinian's arrival, but that was still plenty. That also did not include the clones that Justinian was starting to make. Once a kingdom, city-state, or empire was forced into compliance with a tithe of laborers, soldiers, shapers, and even elites. 1/10 of each was demanded to be handed over to the Imperium of Justinian. Once they were taken, they were separated by their jobs. Laborers either became farmers, miners, or smiths and other jobs, or if they were stronger, were taken to the science. Soldiers were all taken to the Space Marine chapters, which are going to be grown in legions in due time. Once they were modified and trained in the new training dimensions Justinian set up to show them combat, they received their power armor once they passed the harsh criteria. The Shapers were tested for magic talent, and those considered talented were taken to be war Shapers. If not, they still received the magical, genetic, and psychic enhancements to be mages, magical smiths, or war smiths, forging the weapons of war demanded of them. As for the elites, Justinian began to expand his honor guard. The emperor had 10,000 Custodes as his guards, but Justinian was not going to have an army that large. Instead, he decided to set a target for 100 burning Martians. Once he reached his goal, he would stop taking the tithe of elites, but instead have a tithe of blood. As it sounded, every elite had to supply several gallons of their blood, which was of no issue for a Martian, much less an elite. With this blood, Justinian continued his genetic experiments through science, alchemical, magical, biomantic, and esoteric techniques. He created a new race. A psychic race that only answered to him and those he permitted to control them. The Krorks, a race he had always wanted to see come back to 40K, but unlikely to happen. Regardless, he recreated the giant, psychic, powerful warrior race, but he had yet to release them. They remained in stasis within his genetic laboratory to be unleashed into the galaxy. Regardless, the brutality did not stop with the tithes that were taken. Through the brutal crushing of resistance, Justinian's small Imperium brought all of Mars in less than a month to compliance, which would have left 2 weeks to meet with the Saturnians. However, with the time dilation barrier still in effect, Justinian had another 6 years to spare. Once most of Mars was forced to comply, Justinian brought every single psychic focus crystal to his throne room. Using his abilities, he fused all of them into his crystal throne before hijacking and fusing the psychic nets into a massive planet-spanning one. Through this net, Justinian could find even the smallest bit of resistance forming in the minds of individual Martians. When he did find it, he would either send out his Marines and Scions, or he would just send them to Laurelina, who was in the process of forming an inquisition to root out what she called heresy. However, everything was still new, so Justinian took the time he had to stabilize Mars. Once he took control of the rampaging tide of mutated beasts, Mars was truly his. He still had no response from the Martian gods, but all things considered, the Martian gods were minor gods in DC. He still could tell that they were not pleased with him, but he was a divine perpetual who would not kneel to anything or anyone. Once all resistance to his rule was broken, Justinian began the process of setting up a council of 100 Martians, which were all clones he had made in his lab. All of them followed his will with the ability to suggest and advise him. They would never have a self-serving thought, but it gave the illusion that there was some chance of change. There was not, but other than Justinian, Draig Albion, the Space Marines, and his honor guard, no one would know. With the setting up of the council, new laws were passed to manage the Imperium. Several laws were passed, including the outlawing of all religions other than worship of the Emperor or the Dragon Gods. Proper institutes of research were formed where magic, psychic, biology, science, and technology were researched. All information discovered was the property of the Imperium. Murder of another was legal as long as there was just cause or an honor duel was issued. Acts of theft were outlawed, and depending on the reason, the punishment would suit the crime. If the theft was malicious, the thief would be sent to the many mines, factories, or forges for some time until they paid off their debt to the Emperor. Our *P in white Martian culture was extremely rare and seen as pointless, as there was no need to our *P another if you were stronger than them. Crimes of a sexual sort against children were even rare, as *X for Martians was not about pleasure. It was about reproduction, but just in case, these two crimes were labeled punishable by soul destruction after the criminal was used as a test subject for the research institutes. However, Treason and plotting to overthrow Justinian and the Imperium was punished the same way as ex-offenders. A period of being a test subject before having their collected, not destroyed. Several other laws were passed to manage the Imperium. Justinian, Draig, and Albion as the three strongest on Mars worked together to begin bringing great change. With each passing day, Mars continued to become saturated with greater mana and psychic energy. In some areas, more and more volcanoes began to erupt which were allowed to safely. The volcanic rock and obsidian that formed, which was saturated with energy, was collected for construction work or just left where it was. As for the atmosphere of Mars, with the expansion of more fruit orchards, more farms, and more livestock pens, it began to become livable for those who could survive the pressure of magic and psychic energy. Something only Justinian knew was that slowly the planet was becoming aware. It began to communicate with him in slight ways as his idea had been correct. The forming soul and mind of the planet viewed him as its master for giving it life. The ley lines were acting as veins which caused the core of the planet to not just absorb energy from them, but purify it and send it back into them in a loop. This caused more and more magic and psychic energy to flow through the planet. This caused all of the water on Mars to melt and become liquid once more. In some places, liquid mana, mixed with psychic energy, began to fall like rain. Psymagic storms were not uncommon, but they were seen as signs of their planet's great change. Justinian even began to release not only earthen animals that had evolved under the psymagical influence of Mars, but also some of the creations of his laboratory, including the monsters he had created which would breed and evolve on their own. He even ordered that vast forests be grown on the surface in certain areas, which started to proliferate the planet. Slowly, small lakes, slow streams, and some rivers began to appear on Mars. Proper surface life had returned after untold eons. But to make sure that the underground was not affected, different formations were placed to make sure that the water stayed on top and not deep underground. Speaking of the underground, giant forges deep in the Mars, he burned as magical metals were refined in psymagic dragon fire, which was then taken for further enchanting before disappearing into one of the many secret dimensions created by Justinian, where even larger factories churned out war machines for the planned Great Crusade. Of course, the Crusade still had a few decades before it started, but bringing the solar system to compliance would be soon. At the end of the 6 years, in the time dilation to be exact, the first target was going to be Earth, as Justinian still had a favor to cash in. But in one of these dimensions, the constructions of the greatest minds, mages, psychics, enchanters, and smiths worked tirelessly to complete Justinian's flagship, the Invincible Reason. This single project took a massive amount of resources, as everything had to be the best. The metal used in the hull had to not just be the strongest of adamantium and magisteel, but also then had to be enchanted with runes, glyphs, and formations. The wiring that ran through the ship to transport power had to be pure, enchanted mithril. The armor was several meters thick, and a ludicrous amount of weapons covered its massive body. An entire planet worked tirelessly under the Imperium to complete the flagship of Justinian. In 3 years into the nearly 5 years since Justinian arrived in DC, the Invincible Reason was ready to activate. In the secret dimension where the massive Gloriana-class battleship had been constructed, Justinian was sitting on a massive command throne in the command deck of the black and gold 30-mile-long ship. In 40K, a Gloriana-class battleship would need crews in the millions to operate, but all of that was unneeded with the A.I and automated systems that controlled the ship. As Justinian sat surrounded by not his honor guard of 40 burning Martians, but 50, he was very picky when it came to his honor guard, and only another 10 had passed his screening so far. Regardless, the newcomers were all males except the final crazy lady. She got along well enough with Laurelina and Remnosh. Regardless, all around the command throne, several teams of technicians typed away at the different consoles in the command throne. Justinian, sitting with his lover Remnosh on his lap, spoke up. Currently, Drake and Albion have forsaken their avatars and are inside the boosted gear and divine dividing respectively. Activate all systems. At once. One by one, the different technicians began to pull push buttons, turning on different weapon systems, the shield generators, the warp drive, and the hyperdrive. Even the matter synthesizers would allow the ship to create its ammunition when needed. Even food to feed the crew, which was nearly 1 million laborers, space marines, shapers, technicians, and even clones. Much less than was needed to man a vessel of this size, thanks to the automated systems, and I which drain to speak. Lord Justinian, power core is at 100% integrity, and running at 100% efficiency. Catalytic overdrive generators are all operational, and warp drive and hyperdrives can be activated alone or simultaneously. Memory alloy of the hull is activated. Self-regenerating systems are all online. Weapons are all hot and ready to fire. All enchantments, glyphs, and formations are activated and powered up. Transformation cog activated and ready to activate when needed. With a grin, Justinian looked up. Excellent work, Soundwave. Initiate link. From the command throne he sat on, different mechanical jacks began to plug into Justinian's armor. Like before, this caused the ship's many systems to be in contact with Justinian's soul. Soul link established. When Justinian felt his senses meld with sound waves and the invincible reason, he felt like the ship was an extension of himself. Through this link, he began to surge his conceptual energy mixed with divine energy through the ship. Drake and Albion, using the link, also did the same with their concepts of supremacy and domination to enhance the ship. All the while, Soundwave reported openly to all. Concentrations of psychic, divine, and conceptual energy flowing and rising at 100%, 250%, 500%, 750%, and 1000%. How do you feel, Soundwave? Perfect. Power core is working now 10 times the efficiency of before. All systems are supercharged and ready for action. The power core was the replacement for the massive plasma fusion reactors. Inside was a contained star burning with the combined power of Justinian, Drake, and Albion. This way, the ship was truly self-sustaining with nearly limitless energy to use. Soundwave continued to double, triple, and quadruple check the different systems, looking for even small errors, damage in the wiring, or something of the sort. However, the invincible reason was perfect and ready for war. Justinian did not remove the soul link he was sharing with his Gloriana-class battleship, but he knew now that with his flagship constructed, he needed another 20 to match the other Gloriana-class ships. A success, if I do have to say so myself. Rimnosh looked up at him with a smile. I am sure you are happy, my love. I am. This is just the beginning. This was the result of a single planet. In the future, the galaxy will be mine. Funny, isn't Justinian, that the largest Gloriana-class battleship in 40K was the invincible reason at 28 kilometers, 15 miles, but you decided to go all-American and go 30 miles long. Why not? I was American in my past life, but it no longer matters. All that matters is that we still have far more to accomplish. We have 3 more years in our time formation. Our power continues to swell. I wonder just how strong the 3 of us have become. That was a good question, but Justinian would find that out during the conquest of the solar system that was going to begin very soon. He wanted to keep the invincible reason hidden until then, so he would leave it in this secret dimension. He cut the soul link he shared with the ship before he began to prepare for a few collections. He would soon send a few chapters of Marines to Earth to invade Cadmus for their cloning research, to capture metas of notice, bring him Slade, and many more. Now that would piss off the League, but they were in his solar system after all. After all, he was preparing for a united solar system to launch his great crusade. Chapter 33. Raiding Earth. With his flagship, the Invincible Reason, operational and ready for war at any moment, the resources being flooded to its construction could stop. Instead, those materials were taken to construct other void ships of much lesser scale. At the moment, the ones in construction were battle barges and battle cruisers, including some escort ships. When Justinian meets with the Saturnians in the asteroid belt, He wants to make them realize he is in charge. If they did not take the hint, he could always just release his forces, which were expanding in a great expansion of power. He was also always training, developing new magical techniques, new uses for his psychic abilities, new forms of combat, and better means of manipulating his reality-altering powers. Though at the moment, he was not preoccupied with the construction as closely as his flagship. With his flagship complete, he could dedicate his attention to Earth. Once the Invincible Reason was considered complete, the entire crew that operated it left and returned to their regular duties. The ship would see proper combat as soon as the 3 years inside the time dilation field ended. When the time came, Justinian returned to his pyramid in the center of Cadia City, where he had warped through his magic to suit his status. Rather than being formed of stone, he changed the stone to pure auramite, much like what formed his powerful set of power armor. He then enchanted the pyramid and increased its scale, making it a place worth containing his crystal throne and being his place of ruling. Once he returned to his throne room, he decided to call the former chapter masters of the growing Space Marine legions. Now, the Space Marines numbered around 750,000 members across the 20 original chapters. All of them shared the same color scheme of dark black with a double-headed dragon to represent the Imperium. The numbers were going to be grown further, but the quality of recruits must not fall below a certain standard. To make sure that the chapter masters were worthy of the new status, Justinian, Draig, and Albion personally modified the 20 chapter masters into pre-march worthy beings through secret magical, biological, psychic, and biomantic means only offered to his honor guard. Through these actions, these Martians became the most dangerous of their race. Not including the burning Martians, of course, but that was still an achievement to be proud of. Once the 20 gathered in Justinian throne room, he nodded at each one. "Greetings, my war masters. I hope you are all adapting to your modifications well." One of the kneeling giant Martians raised his head with his helmet held in his hand. "We are our esteemed master. We are overflowing with power, and we hunger to unleash it in your name. I am proud to hear that, Talos. It pleases me to see you 20 take to your new powers so well. Remember to never stop training to gain strength is a lifelong pursuit. Now, the reason I have gathered you is simple. I know your chapters are in the process of transitioning from chapter to legion, but I need your warriors on Terra. Select a few teams of Astartes and prepare to return to Terra." Hearing his words one after the other, the war masters began to grin, thinking they would be sent on an invasion of Earth. However, Justinian chuckled, and he corrected them. "Of course, you are not invading Earth, just a few key locations. You are being sent to capture individuals I plan to use in my cloning experiments, or I simply find useful. The forces will be joined between the 20 of your legions, but of course not the full legion. Keep a hard limit of 150 per each of your legions to send to Earth." One of the masters raised his head. "My lord, are we also going to be doing assassinations?" "Yes. Once you slay the people I want, I will replace them with infiltrators who I will contact for diplomatic reasons. They will pass laws that will make it easier for me to start holding their countries. Now, then, the targets you are to be attacking will be 2. One will be in Gotham, Arkham Asylum itself, because I have a few people of interest. Bring me the ones known as Killer Croc, Poison Ivy, Scarecrow, Victor Freeze, and Manbat. If they're not in Arkham Asylum, use magic, psychic means, and rituals, doesn't matter. Track down Deathstroke for me. Slade Wilson, I need him. I also want you all to track down the League of Assassins and bring me Ras Al Ghul alive in the Lazarus Pit. The rest you can ignore. The second location is in Washington, D.C., Cadmus. I want you to loot the place for everything, everyone, I mean it. Bring it all back if you have to. Of course, you'll have Shaper support. Now, I want you to kill the world leaders of Russia, China, North Korea, Malaysia, India, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Bialya, Markovia, and Santa Prisca. Kill all of their leaders, their families, and any other opposition to the infiltrators. Then, I will so graciously begin diplomatic meetings that will slowly allow me to begin to prepare for the invasion of Terra. You, my war masters, will be the tip of the spear, followed by the science and mechanized war. As for me, I will personally deal with the heavy hitters of the League myself. Any other questions? Justinian could see that each of his war masters from the look of it were not going to question him, because his orders were clear. None, your majesty. Justinian nodded. Good, go and prepare. One by one, his war masters teleported out of his throne room to return to their legions. When they were gone, Rimnosh, who as usual sat on his lap, turned her head to regard him. I do have a question for you. You told me about the people you wanted, but what is poison ivy for, Professor Pamela, right? Justinian hummed, as if you had asked him that question 3 years ago, he would have told you he wanted to sleep with her. If you asked him that now, he honestly didn't care enough to pursue her. Even though he technically did have the soul that combined traits of Custodes, Dragon, and Perpetual, he wasn't all that a lustful guy. Neither was Rimnosh, which made them very rarely have intercourse. When they did, it was extreme, but it was considered just a stress reliever. Honestly, I just want her to manage the plant life of Mars to enhance it and give it more vitality. She is an avatar of the green, the life force of plant life, and I find it useful. Rimnosh leaned in and looked into his golden-purple eyes. Honestly, you have changed, my love. You're more controlled? Disciplined, I guess. Justinian smiled as he leaned to rest his head against her. Well, let's just say that I grew up. Suddenly, at the sides of his throne, Draig and Albion manifested as they formed avatars. Draig leaned against the throne, looking up at Justinian and Rimnosh. True, you still had that human part of you. Now, you're all dragon custodes. Albion snorted as he ran a hand through his white hair, which contained a few golden strands. A brutish simplification of our friend Justinian. He simply is not thinking with the same brain as a dumb red like you. Draig snorted as he puffed out his chest. Oh please, at least I got plenty of ladies in my time. Speaking of ladies, I might as well sire a few divine dragonborn. What do you think, Justinian? With a hum, Justinian was curious about that. Can you reproduce as an avatar? Draig shrugged. I don't see why not. What do you think, Lady Rimnosh? Rimnosh glanced at Draig before shrugging. Do whatever you want. Go out and seduce some elite somewhere. Laurelina, you up for it? Laurelina, who had been smiling as she wrote in her Bible, snapped her pen. When she looked up, her eyes were hollow and full of pure loathing. I would rather immolate myself in holy fire and then send the ashes into the deepest black hole than lay with him. Albion began to laugh as he looked at Draig. Oof, so handsome, so attractive to women. Justinian chuckled as he looked at her. Laurelina, yes, your grace. Can you come here, please? Of course. She closed her book before walking over to him. Out of nowhere, he reached out in his hand, grabbed her by her armored pauldron, and lifted her as if she was weightless. He placed her on his other leg, meaning he was now carrying several tons of power armor on his legs. Rimnosh chuckled as she could see Laurelina start to turn bright red like the Martian soil. With shaking hands, she opened her Bible and began to write at lightning speed with a crazy look in her eyes. Seeing this made Rimnosh go quiet. Justinian, I think you made a mistake. With a grin, Justinian didn't think so. You think? Oh well, you only live once, in my case, forever. He wrapped his arms around their waists before leaning back and relaxing. While Justinian took a few moments to relax, his war masters were not relaxing at all when they returned to their legions. Once they relayed the orders they had been given by Justinian, they chose 150 of their battle brothers to be sent to Earth for the missions they had been given. Once the ones who would go to Earth were selected, the war masters gathered together the 3,000 Marines who had been chosen. 3,000 giant Terminator armor-wearing Marines stayed silent as their war masters gathered. We have received a decree from the Emperor himself. We are to return to Terra to prepare for when we invade it to bring it into the Imperium. The Emperor is the rightful ruler of the galaxy, and no planet will be left out of his rule. Not even Terra with the League. You will separate into groups of 150 as you spread out worldwide. The infiltration plan is going to begin, and for that to happen, we must purge the ruling class of several nations silently and efficiently. The nations in question are Russia, China, North Korea, Malaysia, India, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Bialya, Markovia, and Santa Prisca. 11 different nations for 11 attack groups of 150 Marines. Of course, they're not all, as two more are going to be singing Arkham Asylum and Cadmus in the capital of America. We also must ensure we track down the man known as Deathstroke and Ras Al Ghul of the League of Assassins. That will leave us with 4 attack groups that will be spread out among the groups in case they require backup. Our war shapers will back us up by placing bounded fields around our targets in a way they cannot be tracked. If you face resistance from the League, I am giving you express permission to fight to kill, especially Batman and Superman. If you do manage to kill them, the Emperor himself will reward you. That seemed to light a fire in the eyes of these Terminator elites. The Emperor protects. All is one. 3,000 Terminators roared back. The Emperor protects. The War Shaper, who is smaller than this soldier caste, but still in his own set of lighter power armor. He smashed his staff to the ground as he tore open 20 portals. Each of the attack groups separated into one as the War Masters all gave them their blessing. Begin. Unlike regular Terminators, these could run in full sprint as if they were unencumbered. Much like in a drop pod assault or teleport assault, these Terminators move hard and fast at their targets. In Gotham, when the 150 Terminators arrived and the bounded field went up, they rushed in. Arkham was more like a prison than a hospital, and the security there, when they noticed what happened, tried to hold their grounds by activating the Wayne Tech security measures. But the Terminators blasted it with their heavy bolters, heavy flommers, or the Shapers just bombed it with magic. The same was happening at the capital at Cadmus and at the other countries that Justinian had designated. However, the Shapers were smart, and the bounded fields were designed to be invisible and display an illusion to those outside. They did not want to get League attention, and even at Cadmus, the League had yet to figure out. The same was happening at the League of Assassins and Deathstroke's secret compound. The assaults were not going to be very long, but they were going to be brutal.